Frankie has recently moved back to her hometown, and something is just not right here. Strange security cameras are popping up all over the place and no one knows who's watching. Unseen creatures loom around in the dark. Liminal spaces exist that defy reason, and for the love of God, what is wrong with the kids at the Marble House? This is Stagtown, and there's a dark mystery here connected to the town's oldest attraction, a carousel of galloping deer. Frankie, with the help of her conspiracy theorist neighbor, tries to get to the bottom of it, if she can survive that long. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and today we're diving into Stagtown. This is another webtoon comic that came highly recommended in the comments, and you guys did not steer me wrong. Stagtown is a compelling, smart, and eerie comic that I couldn't stop reading. It reminds me a lot of a Junji Ito manga, specifically UZUMAKI, in the way that there's a mystery surrounding this town, and each chapter is a different encounter with something supernatural. There's over 100 episodes, but in this video I'm only covering the first 20, which compose the first 4 chapters. It's a great introduction to the series, but let me know in the comments if you'd like me to cover the whole thing. Either way, you should go over to Webtoons and read it yourself if you're interested. Anyway, let's get into this thing. This is Stagtown Explained. The story opens with music playing from an extravagant and beautiful carousel, but something is very wrong. The spinning stags begin to break free of their poles and leap out onto the ground. They stumble in pain as blood pours from their bodies. Here, the poles look as if they've impaled the living animals who fall to the floor. Nearby, a young woman watches all of this horror, the stags writhing around on the ground, and one suffering and trapped in webs still on the carousel. This is when we get the title page, and you get a clear idea of what you're in for with this comic. The young woman wakes up from this nightmare sitting in her car at the edge of the road. This is Frankie, our protagonist and narrator. She says that she recently moved back to her home, Stagtown. It's a tiny place in the mountains where nothing really ever changes. She left a few years ago to attend an out-of-state college, but she always knew she'd come back here someday. Chapter 1, Surveillance. I just have to point out how much I love the art on this page. It's disturbing and gorgeous. Frankie lives in a decent apartment on the east side of town, and the rent's pretty reasonable, although some of her neighbors are a bit odd. Like a guy named Jeremy, who's the resident conspiracy theorist. Tinfoil hats, Illuminati, that kind of guy. He spots Frankie in the hall and tells her that new spy cameras have been put up on the property. She assures him he's imagining things, but sure enough, he points out a security camera right behind her that is oddly pointing right at Jeremy's door. She tries to explain it by saying that it looks ancient and has probably been there since they built the place, but Jeremy protests, saying that if anyone would have noticed, he would. He adds that this isn't the only one. He's seen new cameras popping up all over town. Who's on the other side of these cameras, and why are they watching his door? Frankie chalks it all up to conspiracy talk and tells him to try and get some sleep for once. The next day, she makes a cup of coffee and sits down at her kitchen table when she notices something above her. In the corner of her kitchen is a security camera pointed right at her. She's obviously shocked and confused and decides that maintenance must have installed it while she was sleeping. This is a gross invasion of privacy, of course, and she slams her coffee down before marching to the landlord's office. When she exits the building, however, she finds that Jeremy might not be so crazy after all. There are dozens of cameras mounted everywhere, on every wall and pole in sight, and they're all the same out-of-date style. The news claims it's all a big prank or art project, but they're popping up in people's homes as well. And the town's traffic cams had all mysteriously stopped working the night before all of the new cameras were installed. Weirder, the cameras seem almost indestructible, and their cables all lead straight into the ground, through walls, or under boulders. While officials try to solve the issue, they recommend people just ignore the cameras for now, but everyone starts to carry umbrellas with them to hide themselves. Meanwhile, Frankie is forced to put up with the camera in her kitchen until maintenance can come and deal with it. Finally, she can't take it anymore and removes the camera herself, cutting the cord from the wall. Later in the evening, she heads out to run some errands, and when she returns, there's now 3 more cameras in the same spot. Although these are much more menacing looking and have metallic spider-like legs keeping them in place. After this, Frankie eats all of her meals in her bedroom and only orders takeout to avoid entering the kitchen. Everyone soon learns the same lesson. If a camera is taken down, covered up, or blocked, it's replaced overnight. And if you cut the wires, then more, even uglier cameras show up. And and every camera cut down is replaced by 2 or 3 more. They're completely still, but those strange metal legs make it look like they could move if they wanted to. And everyone's wondering the same thing. Who's watching on the other side? This whole concept reminds me of a Junji Ito story called The Town Without Streets that I covered in my Junji Ito Explained series. In that story, a girl's family keeps spying on her through holes in the wall, and she eventually ends up in a strange town where everyone spies on each other through thousands of peepholes. Anyway, if you like this concept, you might like that one, but let's get back to the story. Finally, Frankie decides she's gonna stay at a motel out of town until this all blows over. But before she leaves, she feels like she should check on Jeremy, the conspiracy theorist, since she hasn't seen him in a few days. Unfortunately, it seems he's being watched more closely than anyone. There are now dozens of cameras in the hallway, all pointed at Jeremy's door. Sporting an umbrella to shield her from the watchful cameras, Frankie knocks on Jeremy's door, but doesn't get any response. She does, however, hear the sound of a cat meowing. She tells the landlord about the situation, and rather than being worried, the lady is pissed off about the fact that Jeremy has a cat in his apartment, since he doesn't have a pet deposit. She uses the master key to open his door, and when they enter, they see a pretty disturbing sight. The cat is pinned to the floor by one of the cameras. Frankie pulls the camera off of it, and luckily it wasn't severely harmed. What's really off-putting about this is that it implies the cameras can move after all. Otherwise, how could it get on top of the cat like that? Jeremy's apartment is pretty filthy, and his laptop is left open and on a website called bigelope.com with text that reads "The Truth About Bigelope." This is an actual website you can visit, but we'll touch on that later as it has to do with the ARG attached to this comic. The weird thing about Jeremy's apartment is that there's surprisingly no other cameras inside it, just the one that pinned the cat down. There's also a large cardboard box sitting on the floor with mirrors taped all over it. They go ahead and open it and find a malnourished and dehydrated Jeremy inside, along with 6 cameras watching him. They get him to a hospital, and later he tells Frankie what happened to him. I guess he couldn't handle all the cameras watching him, so he made the box and hid inside. After a while, he lost all of his strength and couldn't crawl back out. The cameras then made their way inside. He says that when he was at his weakest and everything was going dark, he could hear the cameras talking to him, voices from the other end of the wires. Creepy. Jeremy's always been paranoid, but this business about the voices is freaking Frankie out. She tells him that she plans on getting out of town for a bit and recommends he do the same when he gets released from the hospital. He says he can't wait for that and needs to get out now. Then he asks Frankie to take him with her, and she leaves. She's hesitant, but finally agrees. That night, they get packed up and start to head out of town, but Frankie is still worried about Jeremy's recovery. He insists that he'll be safer leaving than staying, and so with Jeremy's cat cuddled up on his lap, they hit the road. As they drive through town, they start to notice that many of Stagtown's residents have begun wearing masks. I guess it's easier than carrying an umbrella around and a more efficient way to hide your identity. I hate to reference Junji Ito once again, but the story I mentioned earlier, The Town Without Streets, also features residents wearing masks. This aspect could be a direct inspiration from that comic, or maybe just the natural next step in a society without privacy. A mask might be your last line of defense in concealing your identity. But what would I know about that? Jeremy and Frankie make their way to the tunnel leaving town and find it to be blocked off, with several masked men guarding it. One of the men approaches Frankie and asks her to step out of the car. He says they just need to be sure she doesn't have any cameras with her. Apparently these guys want to stop the spread of what they call an infection outside of the town, so they're gonna search her car. Frankie yells at the guy and says it's not like it's some kind of disease and that she's not gonna be bullied by some half-assed militia. The masked man grabs her and tells his friend to get her keys. Meanwhile, Frankie screams for Jeremy's help. He gets out of the car and the masked men are kind of thrown off by his sickly appearance. At the same time, a camera watches from under the car and suddenly climbs up onto the roof. This is the first time we've actually seen one physically move. Jeremy grabs a nearby metal gas canister and gives the camera a good whack. Unfortunately, gas sprays onto his arms and the damaged camera sparks, lighting Jeremy on fire. It's a pretty scary sight. He falls to the ground, engulfed in the flames, and his eyes seem to be burning out of his skull. Somehow he can still move, and he jumps off the nearby cliffside. We watch as his flaming body falls into the river below. Frankie and the masked men look over the edge in shock. You know, Frankie and the Masked Men sounds like a cool band name. But anyway, she breaks down into tears, and upon looking at the broken camera, begins to scream at it, saying this is all their fault. She then realizes that the camera obviously didn't come with them, and crawls crawled out of the woods. Next thing you know, the masked men begin to follow the wire from the camera into the woods, and Frankie, with no real reason other than curiosity, follows along. The camera cable isn't buried in the ground like the others in town, and it seems to go on forever. They finally find that the cable has led them right to an old graveyard, and after more investigation, they see that there are multiple cables throughout the cemetery, and that they do eventually go into the ground, right into the graves. The men begin to dig up the dirt at the protest of Frankie, who's against the idea, but they assure her that they're just gonna dig enough to free the cable. However, after quite a bit of digging, it's revealed that the cable goes right into the coffin itself. After some discussion, no one has the guts to open the casket and find out what's inside, so they all head home. Strangely, the next day, all the cameras in town just stop working. They dry up and drop to the ground like old mines. The police try searching for Jeremy, but aren't able to recover his body. We can see Frankie has adopted Jeremy's cat, and she points out that there's still one camera that remains in town and seems to watch people go by. But it seems harmless and everyone just ignores it. Like the others, the wire goes into the ground and can't be tracked, but some people claim it appears to head toward the river. That is the end of chapter 1, and what an interesting idea. What do you guys think is going on with the cameras? I like to think that because the cameras lead to graves, that somehow the dead were the ones watching, obsessed with the world of the living that they left behind. The final camera and its cable leading to the river could mean that this one belongs to Jeremy, who passed over and is now watching the town from wherever his body resides. So let's move into chapter 2, Marble House. Just before the start of summer, Frankie has gotten behind on some bills and needs to earn some extra cash to make ends meet. Having some experience giving piano lessons, she signs up on a local gig app and lists herself as a tutor, but nothing comes for the first few weeks, forcing her to lower her hourly rate quite a bit until finally she gets a request from a foster home on the other side of town. So she jumps at the opportunity and heads over for her first job. Here we get another beautiful title page with a huge and ominous house staring Frankie down. She meets with Miss Davids, the foster mother. She's a sweet old woman, and Frankie finds her doing some patchwork on the side of the house. I guess it's a known historic home in Stagtown called the Marvale House, and it has some major foundational issues, so they're hoping to sell it and move soon. Inside, they chat over tea, and Miss David says she thinks piano lessons would be great for the children. She's always trying to find hobbies for them, and right now they're interested in rock polishing, an idea she came up with from the kids mispronouncing the Marvale House as the Marble House. The kids make dozens of marbles from rocks as a hobby. Davids finally calls the kids down to come meet Frankie, but she mentions one last thing. The kids of the Marvale House have some kind of medical issue and must wear masks at all times. They try to make it fun by decorating the masks. Just then, the children come rushing down the stairs, and Frankie gasps at the peculiar sight of the children. All of their masks resemble the heads of different animals, and not like in a cutesy kind of way. They're pretty realistic looking. It's beyond eerie. We jump ahead 2 weeks, and Frankie says she wanted to leave after the first day, but she just really needs the money. And at this point, she's gotten used to the creepy masks. Though she does wonder if this is a home for kids with birth defects or disfigurements, and speculates that the masks may be a way of making them feel safer. Either way, they were really just normal kids. They did their lessons, played outside in the sandbox, finger painted, typical kid stuff. There's an interesting little detail here I only noticed on my second read through, but the light reflection on this kid's mask looks like a man falling. It's very reminiscent of Jeremy's fall into the river. Anyway, everything seems fine despite the masks. That is until the start of the 3rd week. One night, sitting in the TV glow, Frankie hears a knock at her door. However, when she opens it, there's no one in sight. Looking on the ground, she spots a small envelope. She opens it and gasps at what she finds, but we don't get to see what it is. The next day, Frankie is at the Marvale House, claiming that the envelope must have been brought to her by one of the children. Miss Davids is surprisingly calm about the whole thing, even if this would suggest that one of her children walked across town by themselves at night. She says she'll find out who did it and give them a stern lecture, but she's also kind of glad that they did, and mentions how the kids have really taken a liking to Frankie, and that this is just an expression of that. We finally get a look at what was in the envelope, a drawing by one of the kids. The thing is, it's a child's rendition of what happened to Jeremy, almost exactly. The camera, the car, the river, and the flames. Very spooky, and you can see why it's so off-putting to Frankie. Frankie. A few days later, the lessons resume, and they never found out which kid left the drawing. But Miss David's reaction to it was just really off. Frankie wonders if maybe she's just got a delayed shock or PTSD from the incident, and it might just be a coincidence. While she gives a lesson to the girl in the pig's mask, she notices the girl scratching under her mask. It seems to really be bothering her, and Frankie reluctantly asks if she needs to take it off for a moment. In a tense few panels, the girl begins to untie the pig mask. I should point out that while I'm going straight through this whole chapter, this would have been the end of an episode on webtoons. So imagine a few years back, before the next episode launched, the anticipation of what was under the mask must have been unbearable. Anyway, she slowly removes the freaky mask, and Frankie is surprised to find a cute little girl underneath with no disfigurements whatsoever. So they continue the piano lesson until the girl seems to have something in her mouth. She suddenly spits out what appears to be a marble. It looks like one of the marbles the kids made polishing rocks. Gross, was that in her mouth the entire time? Worse than that, it seems she's storing more in her cheeks, and Frankie tells her to spit them all out. It's bad for her teeth. The little girl begins spitting several marbles out, and it's a lot more than expected. In fact, it's bizarre how many are coming out of this girl's mouth. She then convulses and starts puking dozens of balls out as her eyes roll to the back of her head. It's a bewildering and disturbing image. Up close, you can see the girl's mouth widening in an unnatural way as the marbles fill her cheeks. Absolutely terrifying. Frankie finally just screams and runs to find Miss David sitting in the living room. She tells her to call the hospital and grabs her shoulder, but this knocks loose the old woman's hat and glasses to reveal that the top of her head is just a massive hole filled with marbles which come flooding out onto the floor. Frankie freaks out and slips on the marbles, hitting her head on the wall and falling to the ground. Then, in possibly the scariest portion of the comic so far, Miss Davids, or whatever this creature is, comes walking towards Frankie. Her flesh is twitching as marbles move under the surface of her skin, and she says, "I've lost my marbles, Frankie." Definitely one of the most disturbing puns of all time. Frankie is a bit woozy but manages to run towards the door. However, this is actually the door to the basement, not the exit, and she opens it only to fall down the basement stairs into the darkness below. When she comes to, she finds that large chunks of the foundation's walls and floors have been dug out, and the children, without their masks on, are eating the rocks. There's a particularly gnarly close-up of a kid's bloody mouth and broken teeth as he inserts more rocks. Man, it makes my teeth hurt just looking at it. I guess the kids have been using their own mouths as rock tumblers to smooth them out, and they spit them into a huge opening in the floor. Suddenly, a voice cries Frankie's name from the top of the stairs. It's Miss David's, and her body has changed even more, resembling more of a monster than a human now. We can see her silhouette peeking in from the doorway, her neck and arms elongated. She starts to repeat the phrase, "I lost my marbles," once again. She makes her way towards Frankie, and we see her skinny hand grasp the wall, marbles shifting around under her skin. Ugh. Frankie has no choice but to jump into one of the holes in the floor filled with marbles and makes her way across to an egress window on the other side. She climbs up to it, but finds it's been glued shut. Meanwhile, Miss David's hand reaches out to grab her, and now the skin on her hand is stretching out and popping open, dropping marbles from her flesh. With no other option, Frankie picks up a rock and breaks the window open, climbing to safety but cutting her body up pretty bad in the process. Making it back to her car, she reports the house to the police. Knowing her story would sound made up, she instead makes an anonymous call of child abuse, hopefully getting them to at least investigate the house. A few days later, we see Frankie bruised and bandaged with a dozen band-aids covering her body from all the small cuts. She also has a large cut over her right eye, which actually stays throughout the comic. Kind of an interesting continuity detail. Anyway, Frankie reads the local newspaper and sees that the Marvell house has collapsed due to an undiscovered sinkhole. A gas pipe then broke and the place went up in flames. However, Miss Davids and the children survived and were relocated to another town. Frankie still doesn't know if this has anything to do with Jeremy's death, but she feels she needs to get the hell out of this town, and soon. In the final panel of the chapter, we see just outside Frankie's apartment door, a jar addressed to Frankie is filled with marbles and broken human teeth. One last gift from the Marble House children. That is a chilling image. Chapter 3, Carousel. The chapter begins with Frankie saying she's been doing alright despite the trauma she's endured the last couple months. She's had trouble sleeping though and has relied on sleeping pills. She's also convinced her landlord to let her move to another property of hers on the outskirts of town. She doesn't want the Marble House kids to know where she lives. She's actually got a great setup in a pretty nice building. Her landlord even gave her a big discount on rent because of Jeremy dying. I guess she thought Frankie and Jeremy were dating and it's the least she could do. This obviously isn't true, but Frankie just went along with it to get the discount. We see her throwing a bag into her car and hitting the road along with another gorgeous title page. Frankie's heading to her old apartment building. She can't stop thinking about what happened to Jeremy. He was the first person to notice the cameras. He said he heard voices coming from them, and then the awful Marble House children made that drawing. It's just too strange, and Frankie wants to get to the bottom of it. She tried asking if she could see Jeremy's things in the storage unit they were being kept in, but apparently the police weren't letting anyone touch the stuff until they could track down some relatives. Frankie's got a plan though. She walks into the leasing office with a pink hat rack. Yeah, it's pretty striking since this comic is mostly black and white. She tells the landlord that Jeremy let her borrow it, but it reminds her of him too much. So she thought it was best if it went back with his other belongings. After Frankie leaves, the lady calls a maintenance guy to haul off the rack and store it wherever Jeremy's stuff is. This is of course all part of Frankie's plan as she waits around to follow the guy. There are storage units all over the complex, so she needed to be sure where it was. Eventually the maintenance dude heads into the basement of Unit C and Frankie's got her location. She waits till after dark and heads into the building, having made a copy of the key before returning hers. Smart move. She enters the storage units, which are basically falling apart, and the lights are on an old switch timer. It's supposed to turn the lights off after a while to save on electricity, but it's been broken and only stays on for 5 minutes. Yeah, you can see where this is going. Anyway, Frankie continues down the hall looking into the barred storage unit until she spots the bright pink rack. Another clever move. As the switch timer ticks, she pulls out some bolt cutters and breaks the lock on Jeremy's unit. Before the timer hits 0, she remembers to crank it again before she starts looking through Jeremy's stuff. She repeats this process for hours as she searches through his things and so far hasn't found anything of note. That and the fact that she has to get up and turn the timer every 5 minutes is leaving her pretty irritated. Then she finally stumbles upon a black box with a lock on it. She puts it aside to look at later and finds another smaller box behind it. This one is wrapped up heavily in duct tape and has the number 5 on the front. Curious, Frankie pulls out her pocket knife and begins to cut it open. She loses track of time, however, and the switch timer shuts off while she does so. She gets up to turn it back on and sets the box down, which seems to be emitting a red glow. Well, that's not good. She didn't bring a flashlight and her phone is dead, so she stumbles into the dark looking for the switch when she hears a small scratching noise behind her. She pauses for a minute and doesn't hear it again, so she shrugs it off, finally finding the light and turning it on. When she gets back to the box, she takes a look inside to find dirt. Yep, this is just a box of dirt. As she ponders this, the lights suddenly shut off again. Okay, it definitely hasn't been 5 minutes. Frankie once again bumps around in the dark until she finds the switch. Only this time, it shuts off seconds after she winds it. She then hears the scratching noise again, and it seems to be coming from the dirt box. Frankie hopes it's just a rat, but either way, she's ready to get the hell out of here, except for one thing. Her bag with her keys and ID is sitting on the floor by the unit. After a moment, she comes up with the idea of using her pocket knife to jam the switch, stopping it from prematurely turning off, and it actually seems to work. She dashes back to her belongings, shoving the black lockbox into her bag and pushing the rest of Jeremy's stuff into the unit before rushing back towards the exit. Just as she's reaching the door, the timer forces itself off again and launches the key into the air, whizzing by Frankie, narrowly missing her. She looks back at the knife on the ground, contemplating grabbing it when she hears the scratching noise amplify in the darkness around it. At the horrifying noises, she just says, "You know what? Keep the knife, I'll buy a new one," and slams the door shut as she leaves. I like that this character doesn't fall into typical horror tropes. She's just like, screw it. Still, it was a frightening encounter. What the hell came out of that box? The next day, Frankie starts her attempt at getting into the lockbox. In order to do so, she's gotten a lockpick kit, and it actually opens pretty easy since it was just a basic padlock. My only question is, why not use the bolt cutters that easily broke the storage unit lock, which was much bigger? But I digress. Inside, she finds a pile of papers and a notebook, which would be useful, but it's all in code. Of course, Jeremy would put it in code. She also finds a picture of him and his cat, which visibly bums her out. She looks through the notebook, hoping to find something obvious and stumbles upon some drawings of hearts with the words Jeremy plus Frankie written all over. I guess the poor guy had a big crush on her. Frankie responds out loud saying, ew. She looks over at the cat and starts to defend herself saying, okay, not ew, but it just wouldn't have worked out between us. I mean, I don't know him at all. After a bit of rambling like this, she finally realizes she's explaining herself to a cat and starts looking back through the box. She finds a pin from the 1970 Stagtown Fair and some old photos and clippings. She also finds a pill bottle that contains dirt. Man, what was it with Jeremy and dirt? One of the newspaper clippings features the Stagtown Carousel and its history, so she decides to head over to this historic landmark and check it out. She explains a bit of the history that she can remember, that the carousel was built around 100 years ago at the edge of town, and that Stagtown had a history of building some of the first carousels, but this one was a true beauty and became somewhat of a tourist attraction. There's a funny moment where Frankie points out how weird it was back then to ride a horse to Stagtown just to ride a fake one on a carousel. That's a good point. She questions whether it's really connected to Jeremy or just a random article he found interesting. Either way, she continues onward until she arrives at the location of the carousel. Although, we soon learn that the spot is empty now, just a big field. People still call it the carousel though, even though the actual carousel was torn down decades ago. Frankie has a look around and doesn't find anything but grass and dirt. She remembers the bottle of dirt Jeremy had, and this gives her an idea. She rents a metal detector and comes back, but still finds nothing but some old change and an earring. It was a good attempt, but there's just nothing here. On her drive back to return the metal detector to the hardware store, she decides if she's gonna get anywhere, she needs to think like Jeremy, which isn't easy considering Jeremy thought that the government was controlling the minds of children through subliminal breakfast cereal commercials. Anyway, Jeremy was big into research, so Frankie plans on learning as much as she can about the carousel. She remembered from school that the town's welcome center has a room dedicated to the carousel, so she makes that her next stop. The woman at the town center shows her the room, and right off the bat, there's a giant carousel stag near the front of the room with a pretty creepy look, especially after the haunting nightmare Frankie had in the opening of this comic. Apparently, this wasn't one of the animals you could ride on, but instead sat at the very top of the carousel as a decoration. It's actually the only intact piece of the original attraction. The carousel was more impressive than we thought. Built in the late 1800s, it had 3 stories and the roof was made of glass so the riders could watch the stars at night. Frankie asks if the carousel was so great, why was it torn down, but I guess there are no actual records as to why. She then spends some time taking pictures of everything in the room, hoping somewhere there's a clue that will lead back to Jeremy. The woman at the front desk does mention that a young man came in a few months ago researching the carousel as well. It's dark out now and Frankie drives back out to the field where the carousel stood. Then in the distance she sees some black figures standing in the field, but they're hard to make out. She turns on her brights to get a better look and finds it to be a herd of deer, dozens of them, and their eyes are glowing white watching her. The strange glow of their eyes is unsettling to say the least, and in a panic, Frankie drives back to her apartment. She immediately slams down a glass jar, throws some change in, and writes moving fund on it. She says to the cat, when this jar is full, we're leaving. And I don't blame her after that frightening scene. That's the end of that chapter, but there's a short episode here called Remember. There's several episodes like this that take place throughout the series and give us insights into the past of the characters. In this Remember segment, Frankie is checking her mail and complains about the pile of packages by the door, suspecting the postal service was lazy and just dropped everything in the corner for residents to sort out. Jeremy shows up and she asks him how the UFO hunt is going. He seems kind of embarrassed and says he gave up on that months ago. Then he spots the pile of packages and reveals that these are all his. After struggling to carry them all, Frankie insists to let her help and they head up to his apartment door. It's clear Frankie is a bit more organized than Jeremy. Her stack of packages is neatly stacked and his is a complete mess. She drops her stack in front of his door and says goodbye, but Jeremy stops her and tries to ask her something, awkwardly fumbling the words until finally just saying never mind. I wonder what he was going to ask. Was it about the strange phenomenon in Stagtown, or was he just going to try and ask her out? After that glimpse of the past, we jump back to the present. Some unseen person is sitting at their computer when they get an email. We can see that it's from Jeremy and the receiver is someone named Felix who seems really worried. Next, it seems we're looking into the future as the word soon appears on the page, along with some really eerie text. It reads, I don't know how long we've been here, but I can hear music. There's a spooky shot of a carousel, only instead of stags, there are horses. The text continues saying, even after all this time, can you hear it? Vaguely appearing through some dark mist is deer with hollowed out black eyes. Continuing on, it reads, we're almost all together. Nothing gets out. You hear it, don't you? We knew you were one of us." Then we see a beautifully twisted illustration of a disfigured doe, its skin branching out like antlers, and below it a stag covered in massive flies, blood ripping from its eyes, and spiders crawling on its face. It's easily one of the most disturbing images so far. Chapter 4, Under. This may be my favorite chapter so far just because of how well it displays a very specific type of fear. Frankie is putting her organizational skills to work and has spent days trying to sort through Jeremy's notes. It hasn't gotten her too far. She hasn't had any luck deciphering the code in the journal, but she finally finds a sketch that seems recognizable. An old bridge that had closed down years ago. Finally finding a lead, Frankie heads over to the broken down bridge to search around. She reluctantly gets out of her car to check it out, and we're greeted with another cool chapter page, with the title made up from cracks in the ground. Well, other than some dead birds, there's not much to go on the bridge. She reaches the end and stumbles upon a small footpath leading into the woods. After hesitating for a moment, she walks down the path, declaring that she'll probably regret this. After a bit of a hike, she finds a dilapidated old farmhouse. It seems ancient. Frankie's starting to suspect that this whole thing is a ruse to get her to learn town history, but she says she refuses to learn anything from this situation. Walking around the building, she finds all the entrances are bricked up and sealed off. Finally, she does find a window that's broken in. Inside, nature has really taken over the place, and there's plant life everywhere. Frankie leaves for now and comes back the next day fully prepared. She says she wasn't about to waltz into some mystery building without some essentials. She's got water, snacks, bandages, a knife, a flashlight, headlamp, battery, charger, and some rope. Okay, maybe she overdid it, but like I said before, I love that she's going against the horror trope, and instead of just going in when she first found the building, she went back and did some heavy prep work. I love it. She climbs inside and makes her way through the overgrowth until she finds a little clearing, at the center of which is a trapdoor. It must have been Jeremy who cleared the brush around it, and Frankie says it's hard to picture him doing anything in the woods other than maybe looking for Bigfoot. She opens the trapdoor and finds a ladder leading down into darkness. Well, if Jeremy went down there and came out fine, it should be alright. She can't imagine him having any survival skills after all. She plans on climbing the ladder down halfway to get a look at what's down there, and if it seems safe, she'll go get some gear like a lantern and come back tomorrow to explore it. She also posts a tweet about her location in case she gets hurt, that way people will know where to look. Then she ties a rope to a nearby tree and brings it with her. Wow, she's really doing everything pretty smart here. She makes her way down the ladder, but at about halfway down, one of the rungs breaks beneath her foot and the ladder snaps in half. She starts to fall backwards, but grabs the rope, which immediately snaps. The trapdoor shuts above her and she falls to the ground below. Luckily, Frankie is okay, just some bumps and bruises, and she lights up her headlamp. After shouting for a while, it's clear that no one's gonna hear her down here, and on top of that, she has no cell service. There's no way back up the opening, and she finds herself in a square and empty room underground. The only exit being a small square vent opening on the wall. She did bring food that she could ration out and survive maybe 3 days with, which is a plus. After a while waiting around checking her reception, she finally decides to power her phone down to save battery. Eventually, she decides she's got to see where the vent leads, but before she crawls through, she ties a thread to a nail just outside so that if there are any twists and turns, she can follow it back. Clever. Crawling through the vent isn't easy and pretty tiring, and there seems to be no end to it. The only good thing is that there are no turns, just one long straight tunnel. After who knows how long, Frankie gives up and turns around, slowly respooling the thread as she crawls back. Shortly after changing directions, however, she finds that the thread line is already tight. She looks up to find that the nail is in the vent just a few feet behind her, and that the way she came in is completely shut up. That's right, guys, the claustrophobia is about to get very real. At this point, it's clear that there is a supernatural force in Stagtown. With no other option, she continues down the tunnel the direction she started toward. She continues to check her phone every so often, but has to stop eventually because her battery is near dead. As time goes on, the vent feels as if it's closing in on her, and she begins to feel sick to her stomach. She stops to rest here and there and uses the spare battery she brought to keep her phone and headlamp charged. But in the end, that runs out too. She has no idea how long she's been in the tunnel and has to stop to rest several times. Well, as much rest as you can get in a pitch black tunnel underground. It just keeps going, and at this point her body is in aching pain from crawling so long. She feels like whatever the supernatural force is that's doing this wants her to give up. She can hear faint voices in the darkness somewhere in front of her and behind her as well. It finally becomes completely overwhelming, and Frankie freaks out in a panic, crying for help. There's an amazing page page here showing the surface leading underground where Frankie is trapped, her screams echoing through the vents. The author does a stunning job here of showcasing the terror of this situation. I do have to say, the idea of being trapped in a tight space like this is horrifying, and I find myself subconsciously holding my breath while reading this chapter. I hate it, but in the best way. After screaming her lungs out, Frankie breaks down into tears, and we see blood dripping from her battered hands. She gets some band-aids out of her bag and patches them up, then continues forward, convincing herself she just has to keep going. With her headlamp out, she crawls forward in agony in the dark, until finally, she hits a wall. The vent has finally come to an end, and it's blocked off. Like some kind of sick joke. She reaches at the wall and scratches at it. Unlike the solid walls of the vent, this one is actually made of dirt. She starts digging through it, and after a while, some light bleeds through. Finally, an exit. She furiously claws through the dirt and emerges on the other side, collapsing, only to find the nail with the thread right in front of her eyes. She looks up to see on the opposite wall the tunnel that she entered. She's emerged from the other side of the room that she started in. After all that time and suffering, she's gotten nowhere. Frankie just stays laying on the ground in tears. She's hungry, thirsty, tired, and the room is dark. This chapter is absolutely unforgiving. She's finally just completely given up. Clearly no one's coming to find her, and she's out of options. Despite her headlamp being dead, she suddenly finds a small illumination in the room. She looks up and sees a glow by the dirt wall that she climbed through. There's a small object that must have been embedded in the wall, a flying saucer keychain that lights up. Frankie instantly recognizes it as Jeremy's keychain. This reminds her that he was here and that he somehow escaped. She tries once again to think like Jeremy would, and if he were here, she thinks he would look for a secret passage. So Frankie begins investigating every inch of the walls in the room, but she finds nothing, leaving her only one more place to look: the vent. She really doesn't want to go back in there, but she doesn't want to die either. She crawls back into the vent, this time knocking on every panel as she does so. Floor, ceiling, wall. I actually really like the illustration here, showing the knocks on each side of the square text. I don't know why, but I find it very satisfying, the sound effects next to each wall that she's knocking on. Anyway, this repeats down the tunnel until finally we hear 3 knocks and a thud. This time, one of the walls sounds hollow. She presses into it, and sure enough, it opens. A secret passage. Frankie bursts into tears and laughter as she spots a marking on the wall, an arrow pointing in, and a J. So this is how Jeremy escaped. Even so, Frankie feels like she's trading one trap for another. This tunnel is through pure dirt and is way more cramped than the vent. I just caught myself holding my breath again. Frankie can't help but think of Jeremy down here before her, crawling through the dirt in the dark. The weird guy she never spent more than 5 minutes talking to. He must have been so lonely, and now he's gone. Frankie then finds an opening and emerges into a small room. At the center is a carousel pole covered in roses and piercing through the skull of a stag on top. She touches one of the flowers and it instantly turns to dust in her hand. At the base of the pole is a strange black liquid, like tar or something. She looks at the ceiling and spots what could be another opening. She even finds footholds dug into the wall leading to it. This must have been Jeremy's doing when he escaped. Frankie's starting to think that she never gave the guy enough credit. She climbs the wall with her remaining strength through some spider webs and presses her hand against the ceiling at the top. There is a secret opening and she climbs out onto the surface and into the grass. She rolls onto her back and laughs, looking up at the blue sky, appreciating it now more than ever. The chapter ends with her saying once again, "It's time to leave this town right now." Man, it is so satisfying after most of this chapter taking place in the dark for Frankie to pop out into those bright colors. The green grass and the blue sky. It really conveys the feeling of escape from the underground so well. I felt like I was taking a deep breath right along with her, which is why this is one of my favorite chapters of any comic I've read lately. Well, that's where I'm going to end it today. Like I said, if you want me to continue covering this series, let me know in the comments and I'll finish it up. Go support the author Punko over on Webtoons. They actually have a great companion comic called Stagtown where you get some behind the scenes on the series in a comical way. Like how originally Punko submitted Stagtown as part of a 3-month comic contest, but only learned about it near the end of the 3 months. So she did the whole thing in 10 days with barely any sleep. Pretty cool. Also, the mystery in Stagtown goes very deep. There's actually an ARG associated with the comic, and if you look back on various pages, you'll find numbers, symbols, and hidden messages. Not to mention that the website on Jeremy's computer is real and you can visit it right now. There's actually a whole Discord surrounding this ARG. I haven't dived into it myself, so I don't know if it's still ongoing or not, but I'm excited to check it out. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now, and if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me with a social media handle or name at the address below. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.